particular pleasure to welcome two of my favorite commentators on geopolitics to the New Era podcast. I've got Hrvoje Morić and Patrick Wood. Most of the people watching this podcast, I would imagine, will know both of you extremely well. Hrvoje, your Geopolitics and Empire site is just brilliant. It is just fabulous. You know, what would we do without you? And Patrick, you know, you've been a trailblazer in terms of defining the debate, really, in terms of technocracy, creeping technocracy, less creeping these days, galloping. And I'm particularly delighted to have you with me today. Patrick, if I could start with you, obviously we've seen the Epstein file release, heavily redacted, telling us nothing we didn't already know, really, largely as a result of the wonderful work that you have been doing and people like Whitney Webb and so on. But obviously it has embroiled certain key members of Team Trump in a bit of bother, namely Howard Lutnick. And obviously Howard Lutnick's relationship with Epstein shows that Epstein himself was involved to some extent in the creation of the technocratic movement. You know, he was involved, for example, in the creation of the Tether dollar stablecoin in conjunction with Lutnick. But all sorts of stuff are coming. What's your initial reaction to how things have panned out since the DOJ release?
Well,
start with an easy question.
I know. I'll speak as an American, I guess. At this point, honestly, I'm sitting the whole thing out just for a period of time. I've learned in the past, by experience, I have to say, when there's cross currents, where there's a riptide in opposing directions, get out of the way. I don't know how this whole thing will play out. Are there problems on the surface of it? Absolutely. But I'm not sure, even to the point where this whole thing is being brought to us at this point in time, it doesn't make any sense to me that there would be this massive dump of records that it's clearly going to just rip the world apart. What's the purpose of that, even in a general sense? I don't know the answer, but I'm very suspicious the timing of this whole thing just stinks. So I want to sit back myself and just watch for a while. Let the parade go by, if you will. Let some of the floats go by. I think it'll be clear in the end what's going on here. Was the whole thing a rat's nest? Yes, it was. No doubt. We know this, the rats are scattering as well. That's what happens when you disturb a rat's nest. They all flee. And they're fleeing in all directions at this point. So, you know, I'll just stand at this point and let you guys give me your advice.
Hrvoje?
I think that's very wise advice that Patrick gave. A lesson for everyone, and I think that's an approach that we should take to heart, because often in the podcast space, alt media, people want to jump the gun. They want to give their first take. There's a bit of ego in that, and I think there's a bit of biblical wisdom as well to what Patrick says. Just chill out. Let's figure things out. But if I have to put on my tinfoil hat, I've been asking some of my guests this question. I had on Jason Bassler of Free Thought Project the other day, and he literally had the same assessment as I did. So, and this has to do with Patrick's work, right? Technocracy, scientific dictatorship, or algocracy, and they want to get rid of human government, human politicians. So, as everyone is pointing out, the timing is strange. And then, just to take a few examples, Cantor Fitzgerald works with World Economic Forum, and then there was this purported email between Epstein in 2018 and Brand of Davos, where they're discussing trilateral commission, of which Epstein apparently had been a member for some time, and then discussing a new world government structure, floating Davos as one option. And I'll just share this recent Economist article. This is kind of to Patrick's point that the Economist, the Rothschildist, globalist mouthpiece, is talking about this. So they just published this article, Jeffrey Epstein's Ghost is Haunting the Grand Old Man of Capitalism. As we all know, you have to learn to read between the lines, globalists, right? And I'm just going to pull out two sentences from this article. So one is they say the Epstein affair could not have been better designed to embarrass big shot globalists. So the fact that the Economist uses that term, big shot globalists. So this is, I've had this theory for half a decade now, based on Patrick's work. They need to embarrass the human politicians to get them out of the way. And then what do they conclude here, economists? They say, and the designs for society of Silicon Valley's AI labs promise more radical changes than globalization ever wrought. So if I had to put on my tinfoil, I think a lot of the Epstein stuff is to get the old guard out of the way, to bring in the technocrats, a lot of which are younger folks, right? The PayPal mafia, but to lean us towards the software applications, right? The AI software and all that. So that's kind of my big picture takeaway.
So it's almost as though it's like an organized destruction of supposedly democratic government and institutions and all of the personnel associated with that. Because it's the interesting thing, since the file release, of course, the ramification seems to be even greater in the UK, obviously with Mandelson, being kicked out, but even before the DOJ file release. Keir Starmer, of course, involved with Mandelson in the Trilateral Commission too. So it's questionable whether Keir Starmer will even survive. But yeah, it does seem to be that it's a kind of organized destruction, and everybody's tainted. In the UK, all three of our main political parties, assuming the Reform Party is now a mainstream political party, but certainly the potential government in waiting. But I wrote an article this morning about the extent of the Reform Party's corruption and ownership, essentially by corporate interests. But it does seem that way, that I think Lutnick is almost certainly going to have to resign. He headed up the transition arrangement for Trump 2.0. So does that mean that the entire House of Cards, the White House of Cards, is going to fall?
I don't think so. Honestly, I think that the horse has left the barn at this point. Whatever Lutnick has done in this first 12 months or 13 months now, it's already been done. And the superstructure for the new payment system and the asset tokenization system is already in place. The regulations are in place. The legislation has already been passed. There's nothing for him to do at this point other than just collect his money. And so I think he may be sacrificed. Maybe he'll stay, maybe he won't. I don't think it's going to matter at this point. What these people have done, the tech bros, the oligarchs, the billionaire oligarchs, what they've done in the first year, it's just been stunning. And you have to conclude that all of the infrastructure for what happened was already being laid well before the last election. And the reason I say that, when you see a skyscraper going up, being built on the street, and you never saw it before, all of a sudden, boom, there it is. You're driving by. Whoa, where'd that come from? Well, that building, the visible part of that building catches everybody's attention, but all the stuff that went before, the building permits, the design of the building, the architecture, engineering, all that stuff had to be done before the first block is laid, right? So at this point, what happened last year was a massive almost like a building of a modular home or a modular stack of blocks like Legos, where it just came in, boom, and it just got done all of a sudden. It was highly coordinated. It was not just random chance that they got this all this stuff done. And even, for instance, when Trump first got in office, the first thing he did was to wave the Fed, our Fed, away from researching central bank digital currencies. Boom. Well, you know, the step-by-step erection of this new financial system had to be already orchestrated before Trump even got into office. So at this point, nevertheless, the damage has been done at this point, and technocracy is just so ever so close to just basically taking over everything in America and probably the world as well.
Yeah, it's like all of the automated processes as well, and of course the fact that you know, we're seeing the de facto creation of a central bank digital currency by the private sector in Tether, and the proximity of the Reform Party to the technocracy movement is quite astonishing. And it's clear that they are being positioned to act as partners with the technocracy that emerges in the United
Yeah.
States. They're conjoined, essentially. They're conjoined with people like Lutnick, and of course the previous conservative administration, pretty much the same thing. There was, however, some people said, you know, even from our side, you know, that there was a glimmer of hope in that Mark Carney made that speech at the World Economic Forum, suggesting that the rules-based order was ending, and suggesting that Team Trump represented a kind of opposition to the globalist agenda. Did that imply that there is a schism in the technocracy project, or is this all smoke and mirrors and nonsense?
Oh, you want to answer that first? I have thoughts, but
Go for
I
it,
just
Go for it, Patrick. I'd be curious.
well, looking back at the Trilateral Commission back in the 70s, for instance, when they set out to create a new international economic order, that's what they said they were going to do, all over their literature. They passed that off to the United Nations within just a few months. The new international economic order. It was Resolution 3201. So the United Nations picked up this theme on behalf of Rockefeller, for sure, the co-founder of the Trilateral Commission, along with Brzezinski. They put in place what Brzezinski said would be a future technocratic era coming into play. And he was very clear when his book came out. It said America's role in the technocratic era. The first part of that was between two ages. That implies there's three ages. Okay, we're between two ages. In other words, at that point in time, 1973, he saw the world between two ages. There was old age that was falling away, clearly falling away. The monetary system has been just flip-flopped away from the gold standard, for instance. Then you had the current age that we've been living through for all these years since. Now we're coming to the last age. That's the third age. He said that's the technotronic era. He used the word technotronic other than technocratic. There was reasons for that at Columbia University especially. But nevertheless, this is exactly what he said. So he's also saw Marxism as being a necessary stepping stone to get to this point. So all the flack that's been put in play, like the ACAC with the ground forces trying to shoot down airplanes, all this all this narrative, or whatever you want to call it, from 1973 to right now, you see the end of this middle period. In other words, from their point of view, their strategic point of view, the end of the current era is upon us very clearly, I think. And now we're entering the tectonic era. That means they need to get rid of all the stuff, all the baggage from the last era. This is what's happening right now. We saw even the signs of this when first Trump got inaugurated, but we've seen recent signs where he's, for instance, blowing the World Economic Forum out of the water. And who's at the head now of the World Economic Forum? None other than
Larry Fink.
Yeah, Larry Fink. Larry Fink is a member of the Trilateral Commission. You see, these people, they're setting themselves up to look like they're being shot at, but they're not. They're ending the old system, and they're in charge of the ending of the old system. And you see Mark Carney, your premier in Starmer, people like Larry Fink. There's others around in the scene as well, but there's three people right there that are just, yeah, okay, what's going on here? Is the Trilateral Commission out of business all of a sudden? Are they just irrelevant, even in their own eyes? I don't think so.
No, you're right.
But,
of course, Starmer's first guest in 10 Downing Street when he got elected was none other than Larry Fink. Hrvoje, you were going to say?
No, I think that's the correct assessment. There's no white hat here. We're screwed in the sense as Patrick laid out. They're at the helm. They're pushing us forward. And I've been reading a lot of these, globalist publications. I mean, just on Carney again, his speech at Davos, he's not backing away. He says we're negotiating free trade pacts with India, ASEAN, which is the East Asia of Orwell, the Asian EU modeled globalist copy, Mercosur, right, which is the South American Union.
Mm-hmm.
So they're advancing that, and I think all that they're doing is they're filling in the gaps of this world government structure. So I've been trying to analyze this the last few weeks. You had the League of Nations, you got the UN, World Government 2.0. Whither now? Are they going to do away with the UN? There's talk of that. With the Board of Peace, Trump's Board of Peace that all of a sudden was created. And previous to the Board of Peace, he renamed the Peace Institute to the Trump Peace Institute. Just like Patrick said, this was all planned out. Doge did the initial dirty work to, have switch the name from Peace Institute to Trump Institute of Peace, then the Board of Peace. And so I think what Carney and others are talking about, these middle powers, they're at the helm of the big institutions, and they need to sell this fairy tale to the global South of, come on board. You're going to get all these, benefits. Join the big league, and then as soon as they get in, they lock the door, right? And so they're now in the process of positioning the losers, right? Countries, the middle powers, the poor countries, where are they going to fit? Board of Peace, UN, Davos, the BRICS. And so I think they're just filling in the gaps of this global governance structure to see where everyone's going to sit. And then once...
So it's they're kind of playing off the different, groupings, regions, by giving them a kind of alternative to the Pax Americana world order that Trump has sort of delivered. And of course, his leaving the World Health Organization as well is an indication that there's this schism. But of course, it's not really a schism. It's more a divide and conquer type of approach to geopolitics.
There's a concept I want to throw in here this book. Can you read this?
It's upside down.
I think your video might be mirrored, but Martin Erdman, yeah.
All right, okay.
Gold
Turn it up the
Glory.
other way.
Not- okay, this book was written by Dr. Martin Erdman from Germany. He's a great friend of mine. Did you ever interview him?
I was supposed to, but a few days before last year, he had his second heart attack.
Oh,
So,
you're
yeah.
right. Okay, well, the name of this book is "The Greed for Gold and Glory," and there's it just hit the market just recently, about 5 days ago, I think. Um, what he's what he's proposing in this book, and it's very complicated for sure. I'm not going to go into it all, but he's he, he's sure, based on his uh, analysis of history. He's a wonderful historian, in my opinion. He knows a lot about history, and he says we're returning to the age of mercantilism. Mercantil, I can't say that. I can't get the word out.
Mercantilism, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you did it well,
And
actually.
well, what the idea is that the traders, if you will, are taking over the system to make it exclusive for them according to their own rules. And the rules might change from nation to nation as you go along. They originally had their own courts that they would set up to uh, adjudicate trade disputes and stuff like that. Well, one court might rule in your favor, another court in another part of the world might not rule in your favor. And it was very, let's say it was consistent on one hand, but it was totally unjust on another hand. It's very, very confusing time. And this seems to be where we're kind of where we're headed in the end. Especially if you look into the book of Revelation, where, for instance, in chapter 13, well, chapter 18, when the end system, the Babylon system, if you will, is described, you have the shipbuilders or the ship masters standing afar. They've gotten rich off the trade that they did with Babylon and around the world. This is kind of a picture of mercantilism, and it's just an interesting observation. I think it's worth studying because this is a part of history that was a very, very ugly part of history in the world. And this seems to be kind of what's repeating on us right now. And technocracy is at the heart of it. So just saying, it might be worth to pick the book up and see what you think.
Okay,
And
I'll put a
yeah,
link to it as well in the post. Sorry.
I'll just add, yeah, Mike Martin emails me often every week. He tried to purchase as a gift, send me the physical, but Amazon wouldn't allow him. It was the Mexican government who demanded an ID, which is insane. But I pulled his Substack is a great court jester, Dr. Martin Erdman at Substack.com, and I always follow his musings. And yeah, he says mercantilism is effectively this, winner takes all. It's about world domination. It's ruthless. It's about eliminating competition. And I guess I was going to just add one more thing. One thing that came to mind for me was just in the side as we were talking about where we're going, the technocracy, these different factions. I also think that they're positioning themselves. I say like Patrick is alluding to. I feel like we're in the end game here, towards the finish line. And just what's happening now, just as an example here in Mexico, they've announced all of a sudden these days, freak out, measles. The schools now have brought back mandatory face masks, schools and teachers, because of measles. And they're flooding the news media. Like it's almost like COVID all over again. And I'm following the social media, the Mexican social media, how people are responding to the mainstream media publications of be scared, go get your vaccine, and people aren't having it, at least on the social platforms, on the Facebooks, on the X. The Mexicans, like, they see through it. Like, no, you're not gonna fool us. Again, we understand now what happened with COVID. I just had dinner with elderly Mexican folks, and the man told me that he had taken a number of injections, and they wouldn't. His son, at age 34, died. He told me, and my wife's cousin at age 40 passed. But my point here is, to our context, they're seeing it's not working. So I think they're going to have to quickly apply the digital control grid to force our behaviors, because they're seeing they can't sell, anymore. And so I think that's why they're creating some of these new institutions and quickly working to get the digital ID, the digital currency in, because they see they only have a limited amount of time before they've got a full-on, revolution on their hands. So they got to quickly install it.
Yeah, it was interesting too, and to take the discussion in the direction of China. It was during the COVID era. Obviously, the West aped everything that they did in China, and we had obviously the ridiculous falling down people videos in the very early days on social media. To create the sort of fear that there was a terrible, terrible pandemic on the loose. And of course, then we had all of the restrictions, the social restrictions, and so on implemented in the West. But of course, at that time, prior to that happening, we can all remember where we were before lockdown was announced. But prior to that happening, everyone was saying, "There's no way they're going to do what they did in China. They're not going to lock us down." But of course, they did. But that does indicate that China is an integral part of the Technocracy project. And in the discussion, the reason that the three of us were having this chat today is because you had a separate conversation where you started to discuss, Patrick, the Brzezinski, inviting chairman, which chairman was it?
Chairman Deng.
Deng to the United States, whining and dining him, and getting him on board. Really, can you outline how China is part of the project, while at the same time Trump is saying that there's some type of adversary, or that there's an arms race, an AI arms race going on, where America has to beat what the Chinese are up to? How are they part of the project?
I would say they've been a part of the project from the get-go. When Brzezinski brought the chairman Deng over to America, I think it was 1976, perhaps, and then it culminated in 1978 to induct them into the world stage completely. At that point in time, engineer companies who were associated with the Trilateral Commission, and in particular, I'll use one example, Bechtel Engineering. That was one of the largest private engineering companies in the world. They were huge, and no accountability, wherever they went also, but nevertheless, by the time Chairman Deng came to Washington, before that, it wasn't legal to do business with China. And then we discovered that Bechtel Engineering had already completed 18 major infrastructure projects in China, like dams, telecommunications, or communication networks, highways, etc. And you see the intention there. By the way, the chairman of Bechtel was a member of the Trilateral Commission, one of the founding members. You see the intention of building China into a superpower, even from the get-go. By the time Chairman Deng came to Washington, he didn't have a clue what he was doing. He had no concept of capitalism, free market economics, whatever, but they were going to teach them. And remember, China looked a lot like North Korea at that point. They really had no economic system at all. They were just a train wreck. So they were built in the image of uh, Zbigniew Brzezinski and Rockefeller himself. Rockefeller had a huge long-term affair with China as well. He has always loved China. So there was that part of it, the love of China in the first place. But they began to build China in the technocratic image, uh, not teaching them capitalism or free market economics, but teaching them technology, how to use technology, how to make their system into a socially engineered system. And by the time 1991 rolled around, even Time Magazine wrote a feature article. Time Magazine was one of those initial media companies at the Trilateral Commission. The Hedley Donovan was the editor-in-chief of Time, who was a member of the Trilateral Commission. So when Time Magazine wrote an article, and I think it really was in 2000, they said pointedly, China had morphed into a technocracy, and they gave the historical context starting in 1932 at Columbia University. And you can't mistake what happened between 1976 and the year 2000. He said, they rightly said, well, they're not run by ideologues anymore, the communists. They're all engineers, they're tech people, they have the masters and the PhDs in all these technical fields, and they've engineered their society. It looks kind of like capitalism from afar, but they've engineered their society to be something other than communism or capitalism. It's technocracy. And they plainly said that. Well, people today can persist to say, oh, it's the CCP, the Communist Party, that's running China. No, it's not. You see all the tech bros with going through this revolving door between Silicon Valley, America, and China. Elon Musk is a hero over there. They love him. They love his mother too, by the way. I don't know. I don't understand that, but
That one.
May Musk is just absolutely a rock star in China. So Elon Musk can go and build gigafactories and automobile plants and all that stuff in China. They love him there. Mark Zuckerberg just invested $2 billion into a company that was founded in China in the first place. You can't make this. You can make it up, but you have to understand that the tech bros here love the tech bros there. I use the phrase "birds of a feather flock together." There's no dividing at all between these
Yeah,
two
it's
nations.
just and of course it was Bechtel then, but of course now just about every, as you say, every major technology company in the United States is heavily invested into China. Even Musk essentially gifted the design and manufacturing capabilities in terms of EVs to China. The market in the UK market is flooded. I know that they're creating this idea that the United States is resistant to having Chinese EVs imported, but of course it's going to happen eventually. And even Musk is close to manufacturing lines in order to replace those lines with so-called humanoid robots.
Here in Mexico, 1 in 5 cars now is like EVs, and most of those are China BYD. I see them all over the place now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and most of Qualcomm's chips are sold in the United States or in China in order to be put onto the motherboards of Huawei mobile phones, the biggest mobile phone market in the world. So but how long can they maintain this charade, that China's not part of the project?
Well, when you control the narrative, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That they've set the narrative in stone, and they just repeat the lie over and over and over again, and people believe it. I deal with this all the time when people want to argue with me. Oh, communists are in charge of China, and the communists going to come for us eventually. Well, that's not. What can I say? You know my opinion about it now. I just can't. I can't deal with it when people want to insist that this is the way it is. They're communists. They've always been communists. Chairman Mao is still alive somehow over there, and they're going to come take over the whole world. Well, good luck with that. That's not. They may take over the world, but not for Chairman Mao. They'll take it over for technocracy. Look, all of the technology that they've been using for their surveillance system in China, their social credit scoring system in China, all that nonsense came from the United States in the first place. This was invented here. The reason they had to export it to China, because if they were to try it here in America, at that point, it was patently illegal to do that sort of thing. So they just shipped it over to China, say, hey, they'll do it, give it to them. And they have, because they're basically they're that part of the scientific dictatorship, if you will. They have strong leaders in place that they don't care what the people think. So they act like autocrats or dictators. And that's a perfect seedbed for technocracy to exist in. And it's just blossomed there. So all of a sudden, China's just this dystopian rat's nest of surveillance and 1984 Brave New World surveillance everywhere. Now they're exporting their technology back to the United States, where now it's more legal to do it now than it was before. So now it's accepted in China. We're re-importing all of this technology back to the United States. Look at the flock cameras, for instance, all the license plate readers that we have around our country, 43,000 at last count. The stuff, for instance, that Palantir has been involved with, that was originally designed by the CIA. Well, this is the kind of technology that was exported to, in the first place, exported to China to prove or to test whatever on their population. Then they just took it back and implemented it here and now in your country as well.
No, absolutely. And Oracle, of course, Oracle, a CIA spin-out company, is everywhere in UK government, not just UK government, pretty much all of Europe. And Macron has been making noises that he wants to kick out US tech. Is this again another ruse, another scheme to make it appear that there's some type of rift?
Well, I mean, on that, they had all that talk, but it's like they want to create a European sovereign cloud. And I just laughed when I saw who's building it. Amazon AWS. It's like, okay, they're going to have local Europeans running it. It's like sovereign cloud. And then I had a guest on who's great. I'm going to try and bring it back. Todd Miller, who's an expert on the border control biometrics. And he told me 6 years ago, again, the U.S. is the source of all this, what we're talking. I did a mini crash course in preparation for this chat, Jeffrey, and I found a really good documentary. I highly recommend people can find that on YouTube, called How China Got Rich. I think it's from 2019. And just type in how China got rich. And what Patrick said, from the Chinese's own mouths, they say, yeah, we were just this agricultural farmland. We had to go to Japan and Singapore and Taiwan to see what they're doing and bring it here. And it showed visuals of Deng being met by Jimmy Carter, who's trilateral, right? So they say it in their own words, but something interesting they said when Alibaba, the website, went online for the first time, it was in English, right? And so then who created the internet that is the basis for the technocracy in China? DARPA USA, the GPS, who created the first social media? Everything came from us. And I just wanted to add the point that I feel like the rule of law, like here in Mexico, again, I'm just using my example, it's the same case everywhere. In EU, they're just shoving the stuff down our throats, like the biometric exit and entry, biometric digital IDs. And some people are pointing out that's bioconvergence, right? Biodigital convergence, people use these terms. That's giving the government ownership over our bodies, like a biometric digital ID. You can change your password, but you can't change your face. And then, yeah, to what's going on in Europe, yeah, the sovereign cloud system, but they're copying a lot of that from the US now, the chat control
Yeah.
and so forth.
Yeah, I used to many years ago when I first graduated university. I used to work in sales, and I remember being taught about the idea of the assumptive close. In other words, how to close the deal. You would give the customer, two options, both of which were about, buying the product. And it's a bit like that, isn't it? The Europeans are getting all hot and bothered because we need to have the same control grid as China, and China has to have the same control grid as our United States needs to have the same control grid as China as well. It's like, okay, will it be Chinese AI or American AI but it has to be AI because AI is going to provide the control grid, isn't it? So is this again some sort of weird psychological technique in order to sell us the same pile of shit?
It seems that way.
So what's the end game though, Hrvoje? Is it the case that people will say enough is enough, as they are saying in Mexico, and therefore the elite or the technocrats, if we want to call them that, are intent on a slam dunk as quickly as possible? But is it going to succeed? And what's the end game? Is it about clawing as much of the world's resources for themselves and ensuring population reduction, or a supine compliant population? Is that what the algocracy or the technocracy or whatever we want to call it is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm unabashed that I come at this from a biblical worldview. So again, Book of Revelation and all that. I recommend. I recently came across John Lennox, Oxford professor, who gave a
Yes.
fantastic interview. And like, look, I'm not crazy. He proved, he's renowned. And I am obsessed with focusing on my podcast on algocracy, technocracy, and world government. And Lennox says he's been reading all of these, secular scientists like Max Tegmark, and he points out Tegmark, the thing he's most obsessed with is what I am obsessed with. He's saying that AI, what the technocrats are doing, is leading towards a totalitarian world, technocratic government. And Lennox says he asked Peter Thiel a question at a speech because Lennox says this parallels precisely biblical prophecy. And he asked that question to Thiel, and Thiel says, yes, I see that as well. And so I think we're in the thick of it. They're having a lot of trouble. Another example I read yesterday, the European exit and entry system that went online in October. In its application, they're having so much difficulty. People are losing they're having to wait 3, 4, 5, 6+ hours, missing flights. I think was it in Lisbon? They said we're canceling it for now, and they said this summer in Europe they might pause the border because they're trying to get rid of the human customs agents, and you process yourself in the machine, and it's just not working. Here, they told us we've got until June to register our cell phones, or they're going to be shut off. Only 5% of Mexicans have done it, so they're pushing the boulder up the hill. So they're having difficulty, and we should help them with that. But nonetheless, I think the book of Revelation plays out somehow. I don't know exactly, but I think they always get one step back and two steps forward. So they're going to keep pushing, um, as a lot of us don't comply. And it's as Patrick says, it's hard to see exactly how that's going to play out, but they continue gaining ground, right?
Yeah, yeah. Back to Epstein just for a minute. If Epstein, if the Epstein, uh, whatever we call it, the uh, I can't think of it.
Scandal
Yeah,
seems
well,
too little a
the
word.
scandal, the era, whatever.
Yeah.
If this has the effect of completely obliterating our government and all trust in government, that it didn't exist before, but it's really bad now. If this has the potential, like a stick of dynamite, to blow our government apart at the seams, that would play in totally into the technocratic takeover of the engine of economic development in the world. When the Trilateral Commission was first formed, they said they wanted to create a new international economic order. They told us, we debated these people back in that day, and they said, we're not interested in politics, that we're interested in economics. I concluded years later that the economic engine of the world at that point was the United States. You had to get your hands, if you're going to reform everything, you had to get your hands on that. Well, they've had their hands on it for over 50 years now. And the economic system that they've succeeded in putting in place at this point, it doesn't need government anymore. That was always the plan, to get rid of the government. Even in 1932, when they said, actually, there's a little book written, I have a copy of it. It proposed that FDR, when he got elected, should declare himself dictator, dismiss Congress, and get rid of all the politicians. Period. Mm. And this has been in their craw for over almost 100 years. Get rid of all the political system. How would you do that? Well, in the first place, the American system, political system, has been the strongest in the world for a long time. And at this point, it's at risk to being blown to smithereens.
I had coffee yesterday with a good friend, and we were chewing the fat about all things technocracy and what's happening with Epstein, et cetera. And one of the positive outcomes of all of this has been the erosion of the whole concept of left and right. But when we were talking about that, we both came to the conclusion that people naturally seem to divide into two camps in the way they behave. One group is very accepting of bureaucracy and rules. It was interesting that Mark Carney referred to the rules-based order, because a lot of people naturally like to be told how they should live their lives. They like to be structured and strictured and organized and told what to do and how to behave. And then there's another group, like three of us would obviously be in that say, no, we're individuals. We have our own agency. We should be allowed to decide. The question is, I think, in terms of the resistance to the technocratic wave that might be crashing over us any second, is how many of us are there? And how many people naturally find the concept of technocracy utterly repulsive? Do you have a sense, either of you?
Not too many in America. The fact that a poll was just released recently in the last few weeks by Pew, that measured sentiment among people like under 30 years old. And there's been a decided switch or sway of their opinion that government is failing and technocracy might be the answer. This is disturbing, but this is how young people, they have, in America, they don't have much hope for anything. They're deep in debt because they were sold a college education that would bury them in the end. They can't try to find a job. They're still living at home. They can't get, family started, etc. There's very dismal view from our under 30, maybe under 35 age group. This is really depressing.
Yeah.
The knee-jerk reaction is, well, we couldn't do any worse with AI.
And I can give you a statistic from conducted by the Geopolitics and Empire Institute. In my gated community of, say, some 200 homes or so, they installed the biometric exit and entry, and I was the single vocal voice who flat out rejected it. And I got a physical key to use in lieu of my face or my finger. But that statistic, that I was the only person out loud who said, heck to the no, and then just the digitalization process again. Like now, Mexicans, when we go to the airport to leave the country, you have to fill out a migration form. It used to be paper. They just made it digital now with the smartphone. And so it's just kind of like that. It's left. What is it? What do you say? It's left the building.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to go to a point that Patrick was saying, this idea of no government, and something I think people need to have discernment and pay attention. The podcast space and alternative media and people that we all rub shoulders with is there are different vectors attacking, where some people in alt media, again, the multipolaristas, as I call them, the paid pipers, the paid Pied Pipers, who are saying BRICS China is great. They're paid to be part of this narrative, as Patrick and you, Jeffrey, discussed, to sort of smooth our way into it, create as little resistance against it as possible. But also, I look at some of my colleagues who promote anarchism, voluntarism, and natural law, and all this other stuff. They want to do away with the government. So does technocracy. So I know some of these people, believe in this stuff. Others I'm questioning, but I mean, I got to put that out there. Isn't it kind of a coincidence that you've got alt media attacking the critical thinkers, saying we need to do away with government, just as technocracy is slipping in, and then as the multipolar stuff is going on, and so I think that's something that we all need to become more discerning about.
Yeah. Well, my goodness, you've cheered me up. Not. But any final thoughts? I think we should. I try to keep these things under an hour. But any final thoughts? Hopefully, you would give anybody watching this a glimmer of hope as to how we should position ourselves to resist. I think I'm guilty myself, though. To a degree, in that. I'm highly critical of all the political parties. The extent of corruption and the extent of their move towards technocracy. But of course, what's the alternative? Well, it must be obviously that we might see the emergence of some political leaders who take a different view, but I think that's highly unlikely. I think the war you're implying has been lost. So what position should we be taking, as agents provocateurs or whatever, to influence thinking?
I've said for a long time to Americans, you have whatever battle you're going to fight, it has to be fought locally, not nationally. We have no input to the national government in our country, and probably no input at the state level as well. The states are out of control by and large. But you have control over your city, where you have a city council.
Hmm.
These are people who live in your neighborhoods. They're accessible. You can get to know them. You can persuade them, and you can convince them to reject all this technocracy junk, like facial recognition, pre-crime software, AI, government software, cloud-based everything, whatever. You can convince them to put a firewall around your community. They're supposed to be there to protect the people anyway. If they see that's part of their mission, we should really be protecting our people. Let's just not let these data centers come into our towns. Not let the police department go wild with all these sophisticated AI crime solving things that uh, clearly are just a technocratic, endeavor. This is where you can have a significant impact. And if enough people, certainly if enough cities did that, towns did that, you'd have a mass of people that would get it from the ground up and forced the people at higher levels to pay attention.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Unfortunately, this gets no news coverage.
Yeah.
Tucson, Arizona, for instance, is one of the most liberal cities in America, especially in Arizona. And Tucson has a city council, you might figure, very, very liberal, if not left wing. They had a meeting at their city council when they were presented with an application to build a huge data center in Tucson. And the room was packed. This never made the national news, by the way, but the room was packed with people consistently. No, no, no. We don't want this here because they're going to destroy our energy prices, going to drop our water table, and don't do this. And you know what? The city council, all liberals, voted unanimously to send the data center packing. That story never got out because they won't tell you the
Yeah.
success stories.
Mm.
So we see this in liberal cities, conservative cities, it doesn't matter. When people get behind something, uh, they can make a difference.
Yep.
And I think this is the only way at this point we're going to be getting out of this nonsense.
I'll just add, I think another way to go is to starve the beast as much as possible. We've seen that have an effect, although it's becoming increasingly more difficult. I moved my membership to Substack, and now Substack is complying with the
Oh,
biometrics. I just renewed a license which had lain dormant for years for Canva, and like a few weeks ago, and I read yesterday, Canva is actively supporting pro-abortion. So it's just kind of like everywhere I turn, I'm like, oh my goodness. But I love I think we need to look to the past as well as inspiration for the future and all the great dissidents, and then you look at like Solzhenitsyn, who says the simple step of a courageous individual is not to take part in the lie. One word of truth outweighs the world. And so I just find joy, energy, and passion in being a rebel, a dissident, putting spokes in their wheel. You look at it as like a game, as you're a child, and you're fighting against this tyrant, David versus Goliath,
Hmm.
whatever example you want to use. And again, I think in the end they lose, whichever way you cut it. We all know Jacob Nordengard, who comes at it from a secular perspective, and he says the system is so complex, so anti-human. Even if we leave out metaphysics, it's not going to succeed. And then if you look at the metaphysical, I always like to tongue in cheek, Gandalf comes down from the hill, Jesus, right? And throws a stone and destroys the whole edifice. So my faith is in my hope is in the metaphysical, the eternal, but I think there's still a fight to be had. And definitely the Benedict option is not necessarily the way to go. So let's all have fun laughing at the tyrant technocrats, throwing tomatoes at them, and so forth.
Hrvoje, well said, and it's been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you both. You're both my heroes, and it's been a great spending some time with you. So I really appreciate it.